Okay, so you guys sent in some really interesting stuff this time around. Lots of YouTube videos and commentary, all focused on this idea of why intelligent people, they might not exactly be the life of the party all the time.
Right.
And it all seems to connect back to Arthur Schopenhauer in some way. So for this deep dive, we're going to try to unpack all of that for you. We're going to look at why this idea is so fascinating to so many people.
Yeah, and what Schopenhauer actually had to say about all of this. Pretty thought-provoking stuff.
It really is. So we've got transcripts from these YouTube channels, Psychotic, The Rational Mirror, The Counselor, The Psyche, and they're all kind of grappling with Schopenhauer's pretty unique, I guess you could say, pessimistic view of the world.
And a lot of it boils down to this relationship, this tension, really, between being intelligent and then how you approach social life and this idea of solitude.
Right, exactly. Like, is there something about being intelligent that just naturally makes you less interested in all the usual social stuff?
That's the big question a lot of these videos are trying to answer.
And to kick things off, one thing that really pops up in all these different channels is this idea from Schopenhauer.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That intelligent people, they see right through it, Like they see this kind of superficiality to a lot of social interaction.
In fact, Psychotic actually calls it a farce. Which is a pretty strong word.
Yeah, it is.
But it definitely gets the point across. There's this sense that a lot of what we do socially is kind of pointless, like it lacks real meaning. And Schopenhauer believed that intelligent people are often more acutely aware of that. They see it more clearly.
Right. And they're the ones left wondering, like Psychotic points out, why is everyone so obsessed with fitting in?
Totally. And it gets to this idea that Schopenhauer had about how so many of our interactions are kind of transactional.
Meaning what? Like, we're constantly doing things just to be accepted. Like, you're putting on a show, offering something of yourself just to get that validation to be part of the group. And according to Schopenhauer, the more intelligent you are, the more you see this, and the less appealing that whole game becomes.
So it's like they're seeing the strings behind the puppet shows.
Exactly. And it just stops being as entertaining or meaningful.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you have a channel like The Rational Mirror, who comes at it from a slightly different angle.
How so?
Well, they're wondering if it's not just about intelligence itself, but maybe some other factors too.
Like what?
Well, like maybe it's arrogance, like intelligent people thinking they're too good for all the small talk and chit-chat.
Right, all right.
Or maybe it's plain old social awkwardness.
That's an interesting point. It definitely could be a mix of things. I mean, we're all individuals, right? It's not like every intelligent person is the same.
Exactly.
But to understand Schopenhauer's view on this whole thing, I think it's important to understand his overall philosophy. Okay, how so?
Well, Schopenhauer was a pessimist, like a real capital P pessimist. He believed that life is inherently full of suffering. That's kind of his starting point.
Okay, well, that's cheery.
Not exactly uplifting, I know.
Yeah.
But it's important context because he believed that a lot of what we do socially is just a way to distract ourselves from that fundamental truth. Like we're all just trying to avoid facing the harsh reality of existence.
So all the parties and small talk and social media, it's all just a big distraction.
That was basically his view,
Yeah.
And he thought that intelligent people, because they see the suffering more clearly, they're less likely to buy into all the distractions.
Right.
Like The Rational Mirror puts it, it's like they're not fooled by the shiny facade.
So that leads right into this idea of solitude that Schopenhauer was a big fan of.
Big time. He actually believed that true wisdom is found not in the hustle and bustle of social life, but in withdrawing from it.
So not just, enjoying some quiet time, but like solitude being the natural state for a sharp mind.
Exactly. That's where you can really think deeply, confront the truth about life, and maybe even find some kind of inner peace. And he thought intelligent people are naturally drawn to that kind of solitude. They actually need it to thrive.
Okay, so now let's get to the why. Why are these intelligent people, why are they seemingly so detached from all the usual social stuff? Like, what are they seeing that maybe the rest of us are missing?
I think a lot of it comes down to this idea of perception, this idea that intelligent people, they see things differently. They see beyond the surface.
Okay.
Like Psychotic talks about this idea of masks that people wear in social settings, pretending to be something they're not.
Like putting on a front.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they see the lies disguised as courtesy, all the fake smiles and empty compliments. And they see how fragile it all is, this whole system of seeking validation from other people. It's like a house of cards. It could collapse at any moment, and they just don't want to play that game.
Psychotic also talks about how society is often structured more for entertainment than for real deep thought. And that really resonates with me. You're constantly bombarded with distractions, with superficial stuff, with noise.
It's like we're living in a giant amusement park. It's fun for a while, but after a certain point, you just want something more substantial.
Totally. And for someone who's wired to think deeply, who's always analyzing and questioning things, all that noise can be really draining.
The rational mirror makes a great point about this, too.
What's that?
They talk about how intelligent people crave meaning in their interactions.
Yeah.
They want to have conversations that go beyond the weather or the latest gossip. They want to talk about philosophy, about science, about the big questions in life.
Right.
And when they can't find that, they end up feeling lonely.
And it's not like the kind of lonely you feel when you're physically alone.
No, exactly.
It's more like a loneliness of the mind.
Yeah, like you're surrounded by people, but you can't really connect with them on a deeper level.
And this is something Schopenhauer himself struggled with, right?
Absolutely. It's actually one of his most famous quotes. He said, "One can only be oneself as long as one is alone."
So powerful.
It really is. And it speaks to this idea that true authenticity can be hard to find in social settings.
Okay, so we've talked about how intelligent people see things differently, how they crave deeper meaning, and how they often feel like they're on a different wavelength.
Right.
But let's talk about the actual experience of social interaction for them. Like, what is it about it that they find so unappealing?
One thing that comes up a lot in these sources is the idea of social interaction being draining.
Draining.
Yeah, like it takes a lot of energy out of them. The rational mirror and the psyche both talk about this.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily that they dislike people. It's just that
It's exhausting.
being social is exhausting for them.
Exactly. Think about it. You're constantly having to monitor your behavior, filter your thoughts, make sure you're fitting in. That's a lot of work, especially for someone who's naturally inclined to be more independent and introspective.
The rational mirror specifically talks about this burden of filtering your thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can't just say what's on your mind.
Right, because you have to worry about offending people
Yes.
or saying something that's not socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And that can create this kind of mental detachment where you're physically present in a social setting, but your mind is somewhere else entirely.
And this is where that analytical mind comes into play again, right?
Big time. The rational mirror talks about how intelligent people are constantly analyzing and questioning things, even in casual conversations.
So even if they're at a party, they're still in their heads breaking everything down.
Exactly. They're noticing the power dynamics, the hidden motives, the inconsistencies in people's behavior, and that can make social interactions feel kind of fake and pointless.
And that leads right into this idea of pretense, this sense that social life is just a big performance.
Oh, yeah.
The rational mirror and the counselor both talk about this.
It's like everyone's playing a role, putting on a show. You give insincere compliments. You pretend to be interested in things you're not. You go along with the crowd, even if you don't agree.
Right.
And it can all feel very inauthentic.
The counselor actually uses this great metaphor to describe it.
Oh, yeah, I love this one.
They compare social life to a grand theater.
Where everyone's wearing a mask and playing a part, and there's this whole script that everyone's supposed to follow.
And the intelligent person is sitting in the audience, seeing the whole charade.
And not wanting to participate.
So instead of getting caught up in all the drama and the performance, they'd rather just...
Go backstage and see how it all works.
Exactly. Or maybe just go home and read a book.
Something a little more genuine and stimulating.
And that's where the frustration with small talk comes in, right?
Yeah, all those conversations about the weather or what you had for dinner or who's dating who, it just feels so trivial and superficial.
The rational mirror, the counselor, and the psyche all touch on that.
And they contrast it with this deep yearning for conversations that actually matter. Conversations about philosophy, science, art, the meaning of life, the stuff that gets you thinking, that challenges your assumptions, that makes you feel alive.
The Psyche channel makes a really interesting point about this.
What's that?
They talk about how intelligent people are often self-sufficient.
Meaning?
Like they're perfectly happy spending time alone with their thoughts. They have this rich inner world that's already full of stimulation and engagement. So they don't need the external validation and distraction that social interaction can provide.
Right. They have their own internal dialogue going on. And it's probably a pretty interesting one.
Exactly. But it's interesting because Schopenhauer had a slightly different take on this.
How so?
Well, he believed that people who are constantly seeking social interaction, they're actually doing it because they have empty minds.
They're trying to fill a void.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
they can't stand to be alone with their own thoughts.
So according to Schopenhauer, it's not just a matter of preference. It's actually a sign of something deeper. Like maybe there's a lack of intellectual depth or inner richness that drives people to constantly seek external stimulation.
Okay, so it's not all intellectual stimulation and blissful solitude, right?
Of course not. There are downsides to this whole thing.
Well, let's talk about those.
Okay, for one thing, it can be lonely.
Even for intelligent people.
Even for them. We're all human. We all have this basic need for connection.
Right.
And if you're constantly withdrawing from social interaction, you could end up feeling isolated and alienated.
Psychotic and the counselor both talk about this.
And they acknowledge that it can be a real struggle.
And it's not just loneliness, right?
No. There's also this danger of becoming too detached from the world.
Like losing touch with reality.
It can happen.
How so?
Well, if you spend too much time in your own head, you can start to develop this kind of cynicism and contempt for the outside world.
Like you see everyone else as shallow and superficial.
Exactly. And that can lead to misanthropy, even depression.
The rational mirror specifically warns about.
And it's important to remember that Schopenhauer himself wasn't immune to these negative effects.
Right. He struggled with loneliness and bitterness, too.
He did. And it shows that even the most brilliant minds can fall into these traps.
So it's a balancing act, right?
Absolutely. It's not about completely rejecting social interaction.
It's about being selective.
Exactly. And that's what a lot of these channels emphasize.
Psychotic talks about choosing when and with whom to socialize.
Right. And prioritizing the quality of your time over the quantity.
Like saying no to things that don't really interest you or that you know will just drain you.
Exactly. And surrounding yourself with people who you can actually connect with on a deeper level.
The rational mirror also talks about choosing quality over quantity in relationships.
They say it's better to have a few close friends who you can really talk to than a bunch of acquaintances who you just make small talk with.
And that makes sense.
And it also means being comfortable with being alone sometimes.
Embracing solitude. And using that time to recharge, to think, to create.
It's not about being antisocial. It's about taking care of yourself.
And the counselor introduces this really interesting concept.
What's that?
They call it philosophical detachment.
It's kind of like a way of navigating the world without getting too caught up in all the drama.
Like observing things from a distance.
Exactly. And engaging when you need to, but without letting it affect you too deeply.
So it's not about shutting yourself off from the world completely.
No, it's about finding a way to stay connected without getting overwhelmed.
And that can be really challenging, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation.
It is challenging,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly empowering.
How so?
Well, when you're not constantly seeking validation from other people, when you're not worried about fitting in or what others think of you, you're free to be yourself.
That's a powerful.
It is. And Psychotic actually talks about this. They say that not seeking social validation can actually make you more attractive to others. Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's true.
Why is that?
Well, when you're not needy, when you're not desperate for attention, it makes people curious.
Like you have something they don't.
Exactly. And it can be really intriguing.
So by not playing the game, you actually win.
Yeah, in a way, yes.
So as we start to wrap things up here, it seems like Schopenhauer and these modern interpretations of his work, they offer a pretty compelling explanation for why intelligent people might not always be the most social butterflies.
It's not that they're antisocial.
Right.
It's just that they see things differently.
They crave deeper meaning, they're more sensitive to superficiality, and they value authenticity above all else.
And they may even find a certain kind of power in not needing constant validation from others.
But it's important to remember that it's a balancing act.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot between solitude and connection, between detachment and engagement.
So before we go, let's do a quick recap of some of the key takeaways from this deep dive.
Okay, sounds good.
First off, Schopenhauer believed that a lot of social interaction is driven by this need for validation, this desire to fit in and be accepted.
Right. And he thought that intelligent people see through that more clearly.
They see the masks, the pretense, the fragility of it all.
And they're less likely to be seduced by it.
We also talked about how intelligent people often perceive a deeper, more pessimistic reality than the average person.
Schopenhauer thought that life is inherently full of suffering.
And that a lot of what we do socially is just a way to distract ourselves from that.
But for those who see it more clearly, those distractions just don't work as well.
We also explored this idea of solitude being not just a preference, but a necessity for intelligent people.
They need that time alone to think, to process, to recharge.
And it's not just about being alone, it's also about choosing your social interactions carefully.
Prioritizing quality over quantity.
Finding those few people who you can really connect with on a deeper level.
And finally, we talked about this paradoxical power of not seeking social validation.
How by not playing the game, you actually become more intriguing and attractive to others.
It's about being authentic, being yourself and not giving a damn what anyone else thinks.
So as we wrap things up here, I want to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
Have you ever felt this tension between the pressure to be social and your own desire for solitude?
Have you ever felt like you don't quite fit in with the crowd?
Like you're on a different wavelength?
Maybe Schopenhauer's ideas and these modern interpretations have given you a new way of understanding those feelings.
Or maybe they've helped you make sense of the behavior of people around you.
The point is, it's okay to be different.
It's okay to not be the life of the party.
It's okay to need your space, to need your solitude.
And maybe, just maybe, by embracing those things, you can actually find a deeper kind of happiness and fulfillment.
And a more authentic way of being in the world.
And that's what Schopenhauer would have wanted, right?
He would have been proud.
So go out there, embrace your inner Schopenhauer, and don't be afraid to be yourself.
And maybe spend some time alone with your thought. You never know what you might discover.
That's it for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.